My parents forced me out of my room so my sister and her kids could take it. They told me to stay in the basement for now, so I planned my exit and walked away, leaving them to deal with their own mess. You know those stories you scroll through at 2 a.m.? The ones about families so messed up, you wonder if they're even real. 3 months ago, I became one of them. I'm 19, male part-time factory worker, full-time engineering student at State, and apparently full-time family doormat. At least I used to be. I'd been living in my childhood bedroom paying my parents $350 a month in rent while juggling 12-hour weekend shifts and a course load that would make most people cry. I had a plan: save up, graduate, get out. I had about $6,000 in my savings account from 2 years of grinding, and I was supposed to be moving into my own place by summer. The factory work was brutal. We supplied packaging materials to half the businesses in the county. My job was loading trucks, breaking down pallets, and doing whatever grunt work needed doing. The pay was decent for a part-time job. And most importantly, nobody cared about family drama. It was the only place I could breathe. Now let me tell you about my older sister and how she decided to ruin my plans. Vicky is 27, single mom of 2 kids she treats more like accessories than humans. Divorced from a guy named Jason, who according to family legend was the worst person to ever exist. Funny thing about Jason though, every time I actually talked to the guy, he seemed pretty normal. Showed up to his kids' events, paid child support on time, never said a bad word about Vicky even after everything. The marriage fell apart because Vicky refused to work, spent money they didn't have, and threw tantrums when Jason suggested maybe she could contribute something to the household besides posting on Instagram. Anyways, Vicky has always been the golden child. I accepted that reality around age 11 when my parents took her on a big vacation for her 16th birthday, but told me we couldn't afford a gift for my 12th. They could afford to renovate her bedroom, though, twice, and buy her a car when she turned 17. I got a bus pass and a lecture about earning my own way. When I turned 17, I got a job at a fast food place and saved for 8 months to buy a 15-year-old Corolla with 200,000 miles on it. My parents didn't contribute a dime, but they sure had opinions about how I should be grateful for the opportunity to learn responsibility. My mother Donna operates under the assumption that Vicky's life is harder than mine. Single motherhood is exhausting, Colton. She has anxiety, Colton. You don't understand the pressure she's under, Colton. The woman has never once asked about my college, my job, or my plans for the future. But she can recite Vicky's entire life story the whole time. My father Vince is worse. He's the type of guy who peaked in high school, talks about his glory days every chance he gets, and has spent 30 years being bitter that the world didn't hand him everything he thought he deserved. He takes that bitterness out on whoever's convenient, usually me. Everything I did was wrong. My grades weren't good enough even when I made the dean's list. My job wasn't prestigious enough even though I was paying my own way. My hobbies were a waste of time. He once told me I'd never amount to anything because I didn't have the drive that Vicky had. Vicky, who hadn't held a job longer than 5 months in her entire life, he had opinions about everything I did. Meanwhile, Vicky could do no wrong. Her failures were circumstances. Her poor choices were bad luck. Her constant need for bailouts was just family helping family. The double standard would have been funny if it wasn't my actual life. The only person in the extended family who ever called it out was my great-aunt Marlene, my dad's aunt. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and controlled access to my grandparents' estate. My parents had been sucking up to her for years, hoping to be well-positioned when the time came. But Marlene had always given me a look at family gatherings, the kind that said she saw exactly what was happening, even if she didn't say it out loud. So when Vicky announced in March that she was losing her apartment because she couldn't make rent, a familiar dread settled in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I just didn't expect it to be quite so brutal. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from an 8-hour shift at the factory, still covered in cardboard dust and smelling like industrial adhesive. My hands were raw from breaking down pallets. My back ached from loading trucks. I wanted a shower and my bed in that order. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table wearing matching expressions of serious concern. Never a good sign. My father didn't waste time. Vicky and the kids are moving in. They need your room. I paused. Then I set down my bag. So where am I supposed to sleep? The basement. We'll set it up nice. The basement that floods every time it rains. My mother jumped in with her soothing voice. It's temporary, Colton. Your sister needs support right now. You get that right? I got it. Just not what they thought I did. Then came the rent conversation. My father's face shifted into that condescending expression. He said the rent situation needed to change anyway. With more people in the house, expenses would go up. They were thinking $1,400 a month was fair for my contribution. $1,400. I did the math instantly. I made about $1,600 a month at the factory working 30 hours a week. After tuition payments, books, gas to get to campus, and work car insurance, phone bill, and the basic cost of being alive, I cleared maybe $300 in actual savings. They were asking for money that literally did not exist. I would have had to quit school and work full-time just to afford a basement futon in a room that floods. My mother tried to soften it. I was a young man without children or real responsibilities. Vicky had 2 kids depending on her. Surely I could understand that their needs were greater than mine. I was working 30 hours a week while taking 15 credit hours and maintaining a 3.4 GPA, but sure, no real responsibilities. I could have argued. I could have pointed out every single instance of favoritism from the past 19 years. I could have asked why Vicky's poor life choices always became my problem to solve. Instead, I said nothing. Picked up my backpack, walked to my room, closed the door, and started planning my exit. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark, running numbers, mapping out possibilities, and slowly realizing something that should have been obvious years ago. My family didn't see me as a person. I was a resource, a convenient body to absorb the overflow of Vicky's perpetual disasters, and they genuinely didn't understand why I might have a problem with that. $1,400 for a basement futon. The sheer audacity of it kept circling back, spiking my blood pressure every time. Around 4 a.m., I texted my best friend, Alan. Alan and I had been tight since freshman year of high school. We met in detention. Both of us there for reasons that weren't our fault. Him for telling a teacher exactly what he thought of her grading system. Me for defending myself when some guy twice my size decided he didn't like my face. He was the kind of guy who showed up without being asked, helped without keeping score. His own family situation had gone sideways a couple years back. His dad bounced when he was 15. His mom remarried a guy who made it clear Alan wasn't welcome in his house. By 17, Alan was living with his grandmother. By 18, he had his own apartment. He'd been renting a 2-bedroom place for the past year. His older brother was supposed to be his roommate, but bailed for a job in another state after 3 months, leaving Alan with an extra room and rent he could barely cover alone. He'd been floating ads for a roommate but hadn't found anyone he trusted. I gave him the short version. Parents tripling my rent, moving me to the basement, sisters moving in, I need out. His response came in 3 minutes. Spare room's been empty for 6 months. You want it, it's yours. We'll figure out the details tomorrow. That's the thing about real friends. They don't make you justify yourself when you're drowning. They just throw you the rope. We met up the next day at a diner near campus. Alan showed up looking like he'd been up all night. He worked security at a warehouse, overnight shifts that paid just enough to cover his bills. Between his schedule and mine, we'd gotten used to functioning on minimal sleep. He slid into the booth and got right to it. So what's the play here? You need out fast or you need out quiet? Both. They can't know until I'm ready. He nodded slowly. How long you need? Few weeks, maybe a month? Done. We'll make it work. He flagged down the waitress for coffee. Your family's going to lose it when they figure out what happened. That's kind of the point. He grinned. He laid out the details simply. The spare room had a bed, a desk, and a closet. The apartment was small but clean. The landlord was hands-off as long as rent came in on time. Move in whenever I was ready. He also had a plan for my car situation. If I left my car at my parents' house overnight, they'd assume I was home. He'd pick me up after my evening appearance and drop me back in the morning. We mapped out the timing, figured out parking spots where his car wouldn't be noticed, even established backup routes in case someone was unexpectedly awake. The guy treated my family escape like a heist movie. I appreciated it more than I could say. The next morning, I told my parents I agreed to their terms, smiled and nodded when my mother explained the timeline for Vicky's arrival. Even helped my father clear some junk from the basement and pretended to be grateful for the futon they'd ordered. The key to a good exit strategy is making sure nobody sees it coming. I started moving my stuff out that same week. Never all at once, never anything obvious. A few boxes of books and games to Alan's place on Tuesday, some clothes on Thursday. My gaming PC carefully disassembled on Saturday when my parents went to some neighborhood cookout they'd been invited to. My parents watched TV in the living room until 11, then went to bed. I had a window from about midnight to 5:30 where no one would be moving around the house. I tested it 3 times before I started the real extractions. Walked through the house at different hours, checked which doors creaked, found out the side door was quieter than the front, Discovered the motion light in the backyard had a dead zone if you hugged the fence. By the time I was ready to move the big stuff, I had the whole operation mapped. My coworker at the factory, a guy named Garrett, helped with the heavy lifting. He told me something I've never forgotten. He said family is supposed to be the people who have your back, but sometimes blood just means you're related to people who'd bleed you dry if you let them. He said the smartest thing he ever did was learn the difference. Garrett had a truck. He let me borrow it twice to move the bigger items. Didn't ask for gas money. Didn't make it a whole thing, just tossed me the keys and told me to bring it back whenever. By the time Vicky arrived with her 2 kids and enough luggage for a month-long cruise, I had been sleeping at Alan's for a full week already. My room at my parents' house contained exactly what I wanted them to see. Furniture, I didn't care about clothes I never wore, and enough personal items to maintain the illusion. The performance was about to begin. Vicky's kids were exactly as terrible as I remembered. Braxton was 8, spoiled loud, and completely incapable of hearing the word no. He'd been raised to believe the entire world existed to serve his needs, and he responded to any pushback with screaming fits that could shatter glass. The kid had never faced a consequence in his life. Vicky's response to his meltdowns was always the same. She'd sigh dramatically, shoot whoever had upset him a dirty look, and then give him whatever he wanted. I watched him throw a full tantrum in the kitchen on day 3 because my mother served him chicken nuggets in the wrong shape. He wanted dinosaurs, and she'd made circles. The screaming lasted 20 minutes. My mother apologized and promised to buy the right kind next time. That's when I knew this was going to be worse than I expected. Paisley was 5, quieter than her brother, but twice as destructive. She had a talent for finding the most valuable item in any room and destroying it. She'd ruined 2 of my mother's vases within the first week, crayoned on the dining room wall, flushed a full roll of toilet paper down the upstairs bathroom, and caused an overflow that damaged the ceiling below. My mother blamed the vases for being in the wrong place, the walls for not being washable, and the plumber for overcharging. Never the kid, never the parent. The hits kept coming. Week 2. Braxton threw my father's reading glasses into the toilet. My father bought new ones and said nothing. Week 3, Paisley found my mother's makeup bag and redecorated the bathroom mirror with lipstick. My mother cleaned it up and called it artistic expression. Week 4. Both kids somehow got into the garage and knocked over 3 shelves of my father's tools. Nobody got punished. Living in the same house as these 2 chaos agents, even temporarily, required constant vigilance. I started keeping my remaining valuables hidden. Anything I actually cared about went to Alan's place piece by piece. My room became a decoy filled with things I could afford to lose. The basement was uninhabitable. The futon arrived damaged. One of the support bars was bent and it sagged in the middle like a sad hammock. The single basement window was too small to let in meaningful light, and the whole space smelled like mildew and forgotten laundry. There were spiderwebs in every corner. The concrete floor was perpetually damp even when it hadn't rained. The furnace made sounds that suggested it was one bad day away from exploding. The first night it actually rained, I came down to find a small lake forming near the water heater. The drain in the floor had backed up, sending 2 inches of murky water across half the basement. The futon was soaked. My father's solution was to tell me to put down some towels and deal with it. $1,400 a month for this. Not that I actually slept there. Every night around midnight, once my parents were asleep, and Vicky was busy doom-scrolling on the couch, I'd slip out the side door and meet Alan at the usual spot down the block. He'd drive me back to his place. Then he dropped me back before 6 a.m. to shower and maintain the illusion. Alan thought the whole operation was hilarious. He started calling it the Great Escape, complete with updates and mission briefings whenever I arrived. He'd leave snacks on my bed, like care packages drew a welcome banner that said refugee camp with surprisingly good artistic detail. One night, he greeted me at the door in full camouflage face paint, saluting, and nearly made me wake up his downstairs neighbor with my laughing. 2 weeks after Vicky moved in, things escalated. I came home from the factory to find Braxton in my room. He'd somehow gotten past the lock I'd installed, and he was sitting on my bed playing with something. When I got closer, my stomach dropped. My grandfather's watch, the only thing he'd left me when he died when I was 12. It was a simple field watch, but it meant everything to me. I'd hidden it in my desk drawer under some old papers. Braxton had the back panel off. He'd pried it open with something sharp. Parts were scattered across my bed. The crystal face was cracked. "What are you doing?" My voice came out flat. Braxton looked up, startled. "I wanted to see how it worked. That was my grandfather's. He's dead. That's all I have left of him." The kid's lips started trembling. Here it comes, I thought. Mom, Colton's being mean to me. Ooh. Vicky appeared in my doorway within 30 seconds. Full mama bear mode activated. Why are you yelling at my son? I held up the watch pieces. He broke into my locked room and destroyed this. It was our grandfather's. Her response nearly made my head explode. He's 8, Colton. He didn't know any better. Maybe don't leave valuable things where kids can find them. You're overreacting like always. Something in me went cold. Not the explosive kind. The kind where everything gets really clear. You know why your kid thinks he can do whatever he wants? Because you've never once told him no. You've never taught him that other people's things matter. Don't you dare tell me how to raise my children. Someone has to, because you're raising a kid nobody's going to be able to stand. And when he's 30 and still living in someone's basement because the world doesn't revolve around him, that's on you. Vicky's face went through about 6 different shades of outrage. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. That's what this is really about. You're right about one thing. This is about attention. The kind where I get blamed for everything and you get a pass for everything. But I'm done playing that game. You're so dramatic. You always have been, and you're a leech. But at least I can change. I told her to get out of my room. She huffed and grabbed Braxton, shooting me a look that promised this wasn't over. I could hear her complaining to my mother downstairs about how I'd traumatized her precious baby. That night, I moved the last of my actual belongings to Alan's place. The watch pieces went into a small box. I'd find someone who could repair it eventually, but it breaking had given me something unexpected. Permission. Permission to stop pretending, stop performing, stop being the son and brother they wanted me. The countdown to the reveal had officially begun. Living 2 lives turned out to be easier than expected when nobody's paying attention to you anyway. My routine became clockwork. Show up at my parents' house around 6 p.m. Eat whatever dinner was available, usually leftovers, since my mother now cooked primarily for Vicky and the kids. Make small talk that nobody actually listened to. Retreat to the basement. Mess up the futon to look recently slept in. Wait until the house went quiet. Drive to Alan's. Sleep in an actual bed. Return before dawn. Shower. Go to class or work. Repeat. The attention to detail was almost satisfying. I kept a specific glass of water on the basement nightstand half empty. Replaced fresh each day so it never grew a film. Left the bathroom slightly damp after my morning shower. Made sure my toothbrush was always in the holder at the right angle. Set an alarm for 6:30 that I'd cancel before it could wake anyone just in case they happened to notice. All the little touches that made it look like someone was actually living down there. Nobody checked not a single time in 7 weeks. My parents didn't notice anything because they were too busy catering to Vicky's ever-growing list of needs. My mother had become a full-time babysitter, housekeeper, and emotional support system for her. She cooked 3 different meals every night because Braxton only ate chicken nuggets. Paisley was going through a picky phase and Vicky was doing some influencer diet she'd seen online. She did Vicky's laundry because Vicky was too tired. She cleaned up after the kids because kids will be kids. My father had retreated into his garage workshop, emerging only to eat and make passive-aggressive comments about how hard he worked to support this family. The man hadn't had steady work in 3 years. My mother was the one with the actual job, managing an office across town. My factory paycheck was supposed to be their supplemental income, and yet somehow he'd convinced himself he was the backbone of the whole operation. He'd come in for dinner, complain about something, criticize whatever I was doing, praise whatever Vicky was doing, and retreat back to his cave. Vicky, meanwhile, had settled into her role as permanent houseguest with disturbing ease. She'd taken over the living room as her personal domain. Her stuff was everywhere. She didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't contribute to groceries or utilities, just existed, taking up space and resources while posting inspirational quotes online about rising from adversity and the strength of single motherhood. Her social media was a masterpiece of delusion. Carefully staged photos of herself looking put together with captions about self-care and female empowerment, curated shots of the kids with hashtags about blessed motherhood. The kids got worse without any real structure or discipline. Braxton had evolved from spoiled to genuinely uncontrollable. He threw tantrums at dinner if his food touched on the plate, broke things and blamed others or nobody at all, hit his sister when he didn't get his way, and nobody did anything about it except tell her to stop crying and be the bigger person. She was 5. Vicky's response was always to make excuses or redirect blame onto whoever was convenient. Paisley had discovered that she could get attention by screaming, and she used this power liberally. She also started going into the rooms and taking things. My mother called it exploring. I called it theft. The basement continued to deteriorate. The futon fully collapsed after Braxton jumped on it repeatedly during one of his unsupervised adventures into my supposed living space. Nobody offered to replace it. The running toilet became a constantly running toilet, which my father promised to fix next week for 3 consecutive weeks. A pipe started leaking near the water heater, creating a permanent puddle that smelled like rust and sadness. My coworker Garrett became my unlikely confidant during this period. We worked the same Saturday shifts at the factory, 12-hour days that left you too tired to think, which was honestly a relief. Garrett was the guy everyone went to when they needed advice. He'd been at the factory for 11 years, knew everyone's story, and never repeated anything you told him. He was 34, divorced, and had his own story of family dysfunction. Parents who prioritized his brother. He said the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was accepting that the people who were supposed to love him no matter what had conditions attached the whole time. Once he realized that, everything else got simpler. Man, that one stuck with me. Alan, meanwhile, had become my operational support and chief morale officer. He kept track of the timeline, helped me plan my next moves, and provided the dark humor necessary to survive. When I told him about the watch, he got genuinely angry on my behalf. Then he suggested we find something of Vicky's and accidentally damage it. I told him that was petty. He agreed completely. Then he asked if I wanted to do it anyway. I did not, but I seriously appreciated the offer. One night, about 5 weeks after I'd stopped sleeping there, I was waiting by the side door for Alan's pickup when my father appeared in the garage. Got a minute? He leaned against his workbench, arms crossed. Things have gotten complicated around here. Your sister needs more help than we thought. The expenses are adding up. I bet. I need you to step up, Colton. I almost laughed. Almost. I'm working on it. Finances are tight with school. I know it's tough, but we all got to pitch in. He looked at me like he expected gratitude. That's what family does, right? He patted my shoulder, said he knew I'd come through. Alan picked me up that night. I knew exactly where things were heading, and they didn't have a clue. The family dinner that ended everything was my mother's idea. Vicky had gotten a part-time job at a boutique clothing store. 10 hours a week, minimum wage, no benefits, but apparently this was worthy of celebration. My mother insisted on a real family meal. The timing was almost too perfect. 7 weeks since I'd actually slept in that house. 7 weeks of maintaining a performance so convincing that trained actors would be impressed. And they still had no idea. I almost didn't go. But there was a part of me, the part that had been invisible for 19 years, the part that had absorbed every criticism and every comparison and every reminder that I would never be good enough, that wanted to see their faces when they finally realized the truth. So I went. The dinner table was chaos from the moment I arrived. Braxton refused to sit still, bouncing in his chair and making explosion sounds while he played with his food. Paisley kept flicking green beans at her brother, giggling every time one hit him in the face. Vicky was on her phone, completely ignoring both children. My mother tried desperately to maintain some kind of order while also serving everyone and making sure every dietary preference was accommodated. She looked exhausted. The past 6 weeks of being a full-time servant to Vicky's family had taken a visible toll, but she'd never admit it. My father sat at the head of the table, surveying his kingdom with the satisfaction of a man who'd done absolutely nothing to earn any of it. The pot roast was overcooked. The mashed potatoes were from a box. They talked about Vicky's new position, about how proud they were of her for pulling herself together, about how things were finally looking up for the family. I ate in silence, watching the whole show unfold around me. About halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat in that way that signaled an important announcement was coming. The conversation died down. Even the kids sensed something and got slightly quieter. He said we needed to discuss the rent situation. I was 2 months behind. That was $2,800 I owed the family. I set down my fork. Vicky looked up from her phone, suddenly very interested in the conversation. My mother's face tightened. My father continued. He understood that money was tight for everyone, especially young people just starting out. But Vicky was trying to save up for her own place. The household expenses had increased dramatically. They needed everyone to contribute their fair share. The words just hung there. They'd rehearsed this, planned it out, probably discussed exactly how to phrase everything to make it sound reasonable. I looked at my sister lounging in her chair. I looked at my parents, who had charged me rent since I was 17, while my sister had never paid a dime toward anything in her entire adult life. And I started laughing. I stood up from the table, carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, straightened my shirt. "How funny," I said. "I haven't lived here for 7 weeks." Silence. My mother's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and panic. She asked what I meant by that. I told them exactly what I meant. I moved out 7 weeks ago. The basement has been empty every single night, and not one of you noticed. Not once did anyone knock on that door. Not once did anyone wonder why they never heard me. 7 weeks, nothing. My father's face went red. He said that was impossible. My car was in the driveway every day. I parked it there to keep up appearances. I've been staying with someone who actually notices when I exist. Vicky found her voice high and accusatory. She called me a liar, said this was just another attempt to make everything about myself. I turned to face her, told her the family was going through a difficult time because of her choices, her inability to manage money, or parent her own kids. Every crisis in this house for the past decade had her name on it. I told her that her son broke our grandfather's watch, and her response was to tell me I shouldn't leave valuable things where children can find them. In my own locked room, my mother tried to step in, said I was being dramatic. I asked her what family she thought we were, the one that canceled my birthdays for Vicky's events, paid for her wedding and her car while telling me to earn my own way, wanted to charge me $1,400 for a flooded basement while she lived here free. My father stood up, called me ungrateful, said they'd given me a roof for 19 years. I told him I'd paid rent for 2 years on time every month while working and going to school, while they gave my sister thousands they claimed they didn't have when I needed help. I was done pretending any of this made sense. He took a step toward me. I didn't flinch. Whatever he saw in my face made him stop. Vicky demanded to know who I was to judge her. Her life was hard. Being a single mom was exhausting. I told her I wasn't helping with kids whose mother defended them destroying my property, kids with no boundaries because she was too lazy to set any, kids she used as shields whenever anyone criticized her. Braxton started his dramatic crying routine. Vicky rushed to comfort him, shooting me a death glare. I turned to my parents one last time, told them I'd already changed my mail, forwarding to my new address, removed my name from any shared accounts taken, everything that belonged to me, including documentation of every time they claimed they couldn't help me while funding Vicky's lifestyle. My mother asked what that was supposed to mean. I told her Great Aunt Marlene would be getting some interesting reading material. Then I walked out. I drove to Alan's place. He was waiting with a pizza and a movie queued up, asked how it went. I told him they didn't even realize I was gone for 7 weeks. Not a single check on the basement. Not a single knock on the door. 7 weeks of absolute nothing. And they still expected me to pay $2,800 in back rent. He handed me a slice and said that was the best thing he'd ever heard about secondhand. Then he asked if I wanted to watch something. We watched the movie. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, my phone had 47 unread messages. My mother crying about how I'd embarrassed the family. My father demanding I come back and apologize for disrespecting them in front of the children. Vicky sending paragraphs about how I'd traumatized Braxton and ruined what was supposed to be her special dinner celebrating her new job. I read them all, responded to none. What they didn't know yet was the other shoe waiting to drop. See, I'd mentioned keeping records. That wasn't a bluff. For the past 2 years, I documented everything. Every time my parents claimed they couldn't help me financially while giving money to Vicky, every rent payment I made, every dismissive comment about my education or job, and more importantly, I documented the state of the basement. They expected me to pay $1,400 a month for photos of the water damage, videos of the flooding, screenshots of my texts, asking when repairs would be made, documentation of the futon that arrived broken and was never fixed. I sent all of it to my grandfather's sister, my great Aunt Marlene. She was the one who controlled access to my grandparents' estate, the one my parents had been sucking up to for years in hopes of being included in her will. Aunt Marlene was 82, sharp as a tack. She'd never been a fan of how my parents treated me, but I'd never given her specific proof before until now. I included a letter explaining everything, all of it. 3 days later, she called my parents. I wasn't on the call, but Garrett's cousin worked at the diner where my mother went. According to the secondhand account, Marlene told them she was disappointed in how they'd raised their children, that she'd be reconsidering some of her estate plans in light of this new information. My parents lost their minds. Suddenly, I was getting apologetic texts. My mother wanted to meet for coffee. My father suggested we talk things through. Vicky even reached out claiming she'd overreacted and we should move past this for the sake of the family. Aunt Marlene's estate was worth several $100,000. Suddenly, treating me well had financial incentives. I didn't respond to any of it. Alan helped me find a watch repair specialist who could restore my grandfather's watch. Took about 3 weeks and cost more than I wanted to spend, but it was worth it. The crystal was replaced. The mechanism was cleaned and serviced. It ticked again steady and reliable the way it had when my grandfather wore it. Garrett offered to let me pick up extra shifts at the factory. More hours meant more money, which meant faster progress toward my goals. I took every shift he could give me. The semester ended, I passed all my classes. Didn't tell my parents about my grades. They didn't ask. Vicky lasted about 4 more months at my parents' house before the arrangement imploded. According to the neighborhood gossip network, she had a massive fight with my mother over whose turn it was to watch the kids. Said some things that couldn't be unsaid. Moved out in a dramatic huff funded by yet another emergency loan from my parents that she'd never repay. She's renting a place across town now. Still working part-time at the boutique. Still posting inspirational content about single motherhood and overcoming adversity. My parents and I haven't spoken in 6 months. The silence is strange sometimes. Not painful exactly, just unfamiliar. There are moments, usually late at night, when I wonder if I was too harsh, if maybe I should have tried harder to make them understand. Then I remember the watch, the basement, the $1,400 for a broken futon in a flooding room, and the wondering stops. Alan's apartment has become home in a way my parents' house never was. We split everything fairly. We communicate like adults. When something breaks, we fix it together. When one of us is struggling, the other steps up without keeping score. That's what family is supposed to look like. Support without scorekeeping. Respect without conditions. Showing up because you want to, not because you have to. I just had to build it myself. My grandmother sent me a birthday card last month. She's the only one from that side of the family who still reaches out. She'd heard the whole story from her sister, my great-aunt Marlene. Marlene herself sent a separate card a few weeks later. Inside was a check for $500 and a note with almost the same sentiment. She'd also updated her estate plans. I got the impression my parents weren't going to be as well positioned as they'd hoped. My mother tried one final approach about a month ago. She showed up at the factory somehow figuring out where I worked. The receptionist paged me, looking confused. I found her in the parking lot standing by her car holding a coffee like a peace offering. "Can we talk please about fixing this? About being a family again?" She held out the coffee. "I miss you, Colton. The house feels empty without you. The house had 6 people in it for months. You didn't notice me missing then. You know what I mean?" Her voice cracked. "We screwed up. I know that now. We want to make things right." I didn't take the coffee. "You want to fix this? Start by admitting you treated me different. That Vicky's always been the priority. That you spent 19 years making me feel like I was worth less than her." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "That's what I thought. It's not that simple." "Yeah, Mom, it is." I stepped back. I got to get back to work. She stood there for a long moment, then set the coffee on the hood of her car and drove away. I gave it to Garrett on my next break. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, the overlooked kid, the backup plan. You can find the people who actually see you and let go of the ones who never did. It won't be easy. You'll doubt yourself. Wonder if you're being too harsh or expecting too much. Family guilt is a powerful thing, and they'll use it if they can. And honestly, walking away from people who never saw you coming is the most satisfying revenge there is.